Hello, my friends. I hope everyone is doing well out there today. I am very excited about today's guest, Rory Stephens. Rory, you and I had a conversation last week. We were supposed to talk on Friday, and we were actually just talking about how God and the universe work. So we had this incredible conversation, and I immediately said, got to have this conversation. And I want to give a little bit of a backstory about you, if that's okay. So, you and I had a really awesome conversation. You and I really had some similar backgrounds. So, suffering from depression and a lot of things, and I'm not going to steal any of that. I'll let you talk about that. But then you also found plant medicine, and then you became an associate minister at Sacred Earth, which is a five recognized psilocybin church in Massachusetts. But now you're kind of doing that, but you're on your own now. You're on this individual coaching healing, and I got to tell you, Rory, I honor it because I had a conversation with someone this morning that I'm still processing. So a lot of the work that we do, we don't ever really see the other side of it. We don't see the person who hears the messaging. And I got a message from someone that I have a lot of respect for, I haven't talked to in a while. And he's like, will you help me? And then we have this conversation, and it's just you lowered my blood pressure. I can't have this conversation with any other man, but for whatever reason, I can have that with you. Is this something that you hear often?
First, I want to say thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. And yeah, I mean, it's something that almost everyone I talk to experiences because I don't know, as you do this work and you're really attuned to truth and having a connection with spirit and stuff like that, people pick up on that without having to do anything. It's just, you're kind of always having the mask off where a lot of people are having the mask on, and people pick up on that. And so more and more people say exactly what you did, where it's like, I just feel so calm. The energy, it just is like, how do you do this? And it really brings everything into the bigger picture to see that this path really does impact other people outside of you.
So I want to take a step back because I was so excited about this conversation that you and I were having that I didn't even really get an opportunity to allow you to say hi and who you are and give a little bit of your backstory. So normally it doesn't happen. I'm a little bit more cognizant, but I was just so excited to talk to you today that I kind of blew it all out the window. So if we could do a quick, Rory, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your journey?
Absolutely. So my name is Rory Stephens. Essentially, my journey has been one of self-discovery, I think is the best way to put it. So throughout my life, I lived in a small town in New Hampshire, and I went through this really difficult time where I went through depression, like you mentioned earlier, and it got really, really dark. I went to school in Boston for industrial design, so a completely different degree than what I use now. But being there in this kind of big city where I grew up in a small place, everything turned inward and I didn't know how to exist essentially. And it led me, essentially to that question where am I going to continue on or am I going to end all of this? And that was the big pinnacle point where it was like after a decade of dealing with this depression and not wanting to continue on with it, I chose to figure out how the heck I work. And that was the the pinnacle point that turned everything from there.
Can you tell me a little bit the depression? What did that feel like? Because I know for a lot of listeners, it could mean so many things, and I know for me, because when you and I were talking, I had built a shell of a life. Like on the outside, I looked like I had it all together. Like I had the house and the college sweetheart and all of the things. I grew up in a very small town too, and I grew up in a very religious Christian home background. I was dying inside. Like I literally would lay in bed thinking of ways that I could kill myself and it wouldn't be a burden to my wife and my kids and that it wouldn't have that much trauma on them. But at the same time, I didn't go through with it. So I
Yeah,
know what depression for me looks like, but what does that look like? If you don't mind me asking.
absolutely. So for me, depression was a deep, deep sense of hopelessness.
Mm,
It was feeling like I didn't belong here. And that's something that was really prominent for me where I deep down literally felt like I didn't belong here. Like I wasn't supposed to exist. I didn't know how I was existing. It was these existential things. And it really brought me to this place that I had to figure out who I was because I couldn't be pretending anymore. And it's like you said, you become a shell of a person. You know, on the outside, you're pretending everything's okay because you got to show up. You got to put on that mask, like I said, to everyone to make sure that you're not making them uncomfortable because no one wants to be around a depressed person. So then you push it down even more, and essentially you isolate and everything. And it just comes to this place where it's like, I can't do this anymore. It just continues to spiral. And you're saying, you know, I always was saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. All of these different limiting beliefs that I didn't really even realize I was believing
Mm.
subconsciously. And that just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled. And I always believed everyone was better than me and that everyone belonged and I didn't. And I didn't know how to get out of that whatsoever. I had gone to therapy and all these different modalities to try to heal, and nothing really helped. You know, antidepressants didn't help me, it just covered the symptoms. And that was really disheartening because it's like that's all they really can offer you is you go and talk to somebody once a week and you go on antidepressants and hope that it fixes things, but all it does is cover the stuff that needs to be fixed.
I was working with someone last year and said something very similar to that. 17 years with the same psychiatrist. He said, all I got were 17 years of coping skills that didn't work and medications that made me feel like someone else. He's like, they gave me a drug to sleep. They gave me a drug to wake up. He said, before I knew it, I was on 5 antidepressants. And we worked together last year. And we'll kind of get into some of that, of what the work is that we're doing, you're doing. But he said he got a smile for Christmas. And it was the first smile that he had had at Christmas time. And he's just like thanking me. And I'm like, bro, I didn't do anything. Like, I didn't do anything. The mushroom only allowed you to see who you really were. It didn't do anything. It's not magic. I always talk about that at all of my shows. Like, there is no magic in this. It just allows you to be free of what that is. But so you're struggling with all of this. And no one knows. And you finally, did you have a rock bottom? I know I had a rock bottom. Um,
Oh, yeah.
so what did that look
Yeah.
like?
Well, my rock bottom was, you know, I would self harm every day, you know, to the point where I was on the verge of ending my life.
Mm.
And I would be up all night long in the bathroom in my dorm in college. And I was living with 5 or 6 other people. Not one person knew it. And I was in the bathroom all night long, hurting myself essentially because it was the only way I could find peace. And then, you know, I'd be writing in my journal all of these things about how I wanted to end my life and figuring out how to do that without destroying everyone else.
Isn't that
And
ironic how
it is.
we want to kill ourselves, yet we don't want to be a burden to anyone else in our death?
Right. Well, we know how difficult the suffering is, and we don't want to bring that to someone else.
Yeah.
That's the way it was for me, at least.
Yeah. Same.
And yeah, so the thing that really was a turning point was I went home and my parents somehow found one of the journal entries that I had written and they confronted me about it because, of course, they were extremely worried. I mean, it was not a normal thing to read at all. And especially your son is writing this stuff about how he wants to end his life. And so they pretty much wanted me to go and see help, but not like just go to a therapist. You know, they wanted me to be admitted to some place. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. That's not going to help me. That's going to break my psyche even more. And I agreed to start putting in the work, like to a further extent, really go see somebody. I saw a behavioral therapist, which they it was probably the worst therapist I ever saw. It was like talking to a robot, you know, how do you feel today? Type of deal.
Oh, yeah.
And but, you know, so that rock bottom, luckily my parents found that. As embarrassing and how much shame I pushed on myself and everything because of them discovering that, it also brought reality about. And it made me start to see, okay, I got to do something about this. And then, you know, there was other situations in life that were piling up and I just like had to almost isolate to such an extent that I could turn inward and focus on me. And so it was really that point of I came to that question of, am I going to kill myself or am I going to figure out how to do this because I can't live like this anymore. So something has to change.
Now, how old were you when all this was kind of happening?
I think I was a junior in college.
Okay.
So I was about 20, 21 years old. So
Oh,
very
so
young. And it was, my whole life, since seventh grade was the first time I self-harmed.
you know what's so interesting about that? Because I've never really gotten into that conversation about my whole backstory. Seventh grade was, I think, for me, I used to sit on a hill by my grandparents' house. I was abused every Sunday for 2 years. I started at 5, and I would like just repressed all of it. But I remember sitting on a hill by my grandparents' house, and I would like look down and I would write very similar, just this like unbelievably dark and painful poems and stories and journal entries of never really remembering a time that I wanted to live. But it's so fascinating at as early as seventh grade.
Yeah. And coincidentally, that's when I started smoking cannabis. And I
Okay.
don't know if that had something to do with it or if it was just me trying to cover up the symptoms of the pain.
And oftentimes I hear that a lot that people initially they'll try to escape in some other means because that's typically what we always try to do. Ironically, I found exercise. Like I never cut. I can't say that. I cut in my early teenage years. No one ever knew. And then I started getting into ultra distance racing. So the only way for me to feel pain was to truly physically beat my body, run for 27 hours to do
Wow.
these unbelievably, in hindsight, like insane things. But it's amazing how we try to find or substitute pain for something else. So you're 21, you're 22, you're going through, you're a junior in college, and have you discovered any alternative therapies at this point?
Well, really my first jumping off point to like trying to figure things out was getting out of bed, as funny as that sounds.
Mm.
But it was very symbolic because I used to just like sleep and be in bed all the time. And it was like, okay, there's some sort of discipline that has to come into place. And so I got out and I started to read these different self-help books. Things like Eckhart Tolle,
Oh, yeah.
Ram Dass was a big person that I got into. I listened to probably thousands of hours of his talks. And it started to really put words to the things that I felt, the existential, deeper questions that I just couldn't understand or figure out. And so doing that really allowed for me to start to dig into my own psyche, to see that other people feel it and they were using it as a modality to be able to explore who they were in a bigger sense. I had grown up religious too. I was Protestant, so it's a more laid back religion, but at the same time, it was church every Sunday, Sunday school every Sunday, doing the plays, doing the choir, all of the stuff.
I
And
used to
I,
say I was a drug addict. So if there was a tent revival or a church service in a 20 square mile radius, I was drugged there. Literally, like my dad was an elder at the church, and we sat in the front row. And it's very funny because my wife I grew up in the same way. Her grandfather actually was a pastor of a Kentucky Pentecostal, speaking in tongues, snake handling church. So we had all this baggage. Do you think the baggage had anything to do with it? And I don't. Yeah, I'm just going to use the word baggage because I feel like sometimes we wear so much of this religious upbringing as it really is a bag. I think they mean well, but I do think that there is some baggage to it.
and I was really lucky because my parents weren't overly religious, and we would go to church and everything like that, but eventually it got to a place where, gosh, I was probably, I don't know, early teens. And me and my sister were kind of just like done with church. And we were just like, we don't want to be doing this. And the whole family, actually, we stopped going to church. And that was a turning point. But it also made me kind of question God, and it left baggage because I didn't like that church and religion was so controlling. And it felt
Mm.
so judgmental by the individuals that were within that community because it was either you were all in or you were out.
And I always struggle with that too because I always laugh at this part of that in me because I hated it so much. But I went to Bible college. Like, I didn't know what to do with my life. So at 17, I graduate high school. My mom and dad went to Bible college. So like, I don't really know what I want to do. I'm 17. I want to go in the military, but I'm not like there yet. So I did. I went to Bible college.
How was
And
that?
so what's fascinating about the whole Christian religion is that we have this idea that we're saved from something instead of being saved to something greater, which again, I think going back to that baggage, like it's like we're worthless and we're sinners and we're all of these things, and we all come short of the glory of God, which I find so ironic because we're created in his image. Like how can we fall short if we're literally created in his image? Like, and that might offend some people here, but people, like, we're saved to something much greater.
And that's exactly what I used to think too. I questioned so much of it because it felt so controlling and it just felt like it was illusionary. The best way I can put it. It felt like it was, how is God separate from us and why is he looking down on us and judging us? If it was God and he created us, wouldn't we be perfect in his eyes? And all these things. And I started to really reflect on it. To have a God outside of us means that we're separate from God, and that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so it started to make me realize that, at least, my own beliefs came to be that religion, organized religion, was more about control than it was anything else. Doesn't mean there's not incredibly beautiful truths within it, but a lot of it is be God fearing in a way that is you're fearing to be you. You have to be picture perfect and put this mask on and button up your shirt properly, or else you're going to be judged and shamed by the church and by God, essentially.
I'm listening to this book right now, and I'm reading. It's a book by his name is John Eldredge. It's called Wild at Heart,
Okay.
and he actually talks about the wild heart of God. Because if you kind of go back to Genesis, and I didn't really mean to go there at all, but if you go to Genesis and you read how man was created, we were created in the wild. We were created in the jungles, this beautiful lush garden. We're naming all the animals. He says have dominion, but the word dominion itself is not power over, it's power from serving. And I feel like we have this false illusion of men, and that's what basically what the book is about how men in the church feel more dutiful, that they're supposed to be the nice guy, that they're basically just, and I hate using the word neutered, but we've lost our identity and our souls because we're supposed to be wild. We're supposed to be outside. We're supposed to like try to figure it out and do crazy stuff. And it's like society has us apologize and you can't do that and be a good boy and boys don't cry and all of this stuff I think compounds some of that. And then the same thing with girls, like, act like a lady, and do all these. So we have defined these roles within men and within women. And I feel like that's where maybe some of it is. Like we're still trying to sort out what we're naturally created to be. We're told that we're all less than. I watch my daughter. So my daughter and I are going to go to I have an 11-year-old. My daughter and I are going to a daddy daughter dance.
Beautiful.
And all daughters want is daddy's recognition. All they want. So my wife bought my daughter a dress, and it's this beautiful purple, her favorite color, and it's got these long gloves. And it came, and she's twirling, and she's like, "How do I look, daddy?"
Wow.
And they grow up and they lose that. And they become more dutiful. And the husband is no longer making them part of the adventure. They're basically like something to catch and then they throw them on a wall, like for the lack of a better thing. But
It's a
it's
good
I
way to
think
put it.
but I think it's because we as men have forgot like who we were supposed to be and who we're called to be. So and I think those labels that we put on ourselves are what really kind of add to this depression and these things and the things that we're experiencing.
And I think to go directly along with that, what happened is a lot of people try to tell you how to be instead of
Mhm.
allowing you to discover who you are and
Oh,
to
wow.
have a good moral insight within yourself towards right and wrong and everything like that. But if someone else is telling you, then you're always trying to fit in their image. And so then you're never actually showing up as yourself. You're showing up as who you think they want you to be. And so I
Totally.
think that in history, we've kind of done that because people said, well, the way that I've done it has been amazing. You should be like this. So we try to morph people into this image that isn't authentic to these people. And
So I talk to my kids like that, which is so crazy because if you go back in history long enough, right and wrong are always different. There really is no right and wrong. There only is. And it's what our interpretation is at that particular moment. And I challenge my kids all the time when they're like, well, that's wrong. Why? Why is that wrong? Who says it's wrong? It's either your neighbors, your community, your school, your culture, or your religion. They're telling you what is right and wrong, but go back 200 years, go back 300 years. Most of our interpretations, I think, maybe you'll agree, are of right and wrong are from the Dark Ages. They're from medieval times when we still didn't even match religion and science to some degree. Um,
sure. Yeah. And with that, I think that, right and wrong is a human construct in general. If you look at it from spirit's point of view, it's just neutral. It's just stuff playing out and happening. And
mm,
when I work with my clients, I always tell them, who's the voice in your head? And when they start to look in, most of the time it's, one of the parents or something. And so their belief systems, their right and wrong, is all based off of what they've been told, usually from a parent or some outside higher authority that was impactful and made them fear being a certain way. So they showed up how they were told was right or wrong. And everything else falls in line from that point.
wow. So walk me through kind of a scenario of that. I'm your client and I come to you because I feel like that is so incredibly insightful. Like, so how would you have me do that exercise for listeners just real quick? Because I feel like for whatever reason that just touched me in a really big way.
Well, I think it would depend on really what we're discussing, what you're moving through, of course. But most people are completely identified with the illusions of the mind. If anything, they're identified with the mind and believe they are their mind. And so
Mm.
I have people, first and foremost, when I start working with anyone, we always tune into the witness of the mind. So it's watching your thoughts so that you separate yourself from your thoughts to be able to see any patterns or anything like that, to understand what goes through your mind. And so that separates you and allows you to really see that you're not your thoughts. Your thoughts are just things that are flowing through. And most of the time, you can understand where those thoughts came from because you're observing the patterns that come up when you see them.
So one of the exercises I always use too as a facilitator is I have you close your eyes and I have you whatever the story is that we're telling ourselves. And my kids drives them insane when I say the story is never the story. It's always like three down and two over and one around the corner, but it's never the story. So I always say close your eyes and whatever the thing is, tell me exactly what you're What tell me what is coming up for you when you're doing it, and it's usually like, exactly like you're saying it's something from the past that is creating a future story. It is never in the present.
And that is all of human. It's all human. We grow up and have impactful moments and things that are programming us. And our mind is essentially created to protect us at all costs. And so when things happen, we have new programs that are created, you know, and they essentially are always trying to protect us. And so everything from the past gets projected all throughout your entire life to try to prevent that same pain from happening again.
Mm. I always say this. So the brain's number one job is to keep us safe,
That's
which
it,
is the fight, flight, or freeze response system.
right? And so when you get caught up in what the brain is saying and you believe it's you, all of a sudden you get stuck in survival mode.
And I feel like that when you were describing what it was like getting out of bed, whether we realize it or not, I heard this crazy statistic that your brain is processing like 60 gig of data every second. But your eyes can actually only handle about 40 meg. So we're actually, it's all going in, but we're actually only able to filter. So it's creating, as you're saying, these scenarios all the time. Like, what's going on? I'm having this conversation with Rory right now. I'm moving my fingers, and there's going to be some interpretation of something from the past that's going to dictate the future. And I heard this example, which I thought was so incredibly fascinating. Every morning when you get out of bed, your brain, whether you realize it or not, creates two hypotheses. two. It's either a cliff on the other side of the bed and you're going to fall off, which is why some people have like crazy chronic depression, fear, anxiety. They can't get out of bed because their brain, as you're saying, is focusing so much on it being a cliff. And then there's the other one that has already figured it out, has already processed that it's a floor, it's touch, it's a rug, it's comfortable, and I'm going to get out and go about my day. But those scenarios play out. And I found that so fascinating because it all happens so fast that we don't even realize it's happening.
Right. And usually it happens because we get programmed into that. You
Mm.
have a handful of days that are not going good. And so you start to believe that your days are just not going to be good. And so now you wake up and you have that initial thought that my day is not going to be good. And right there, you're already sensing that danger is present. And that's the cliff.
The cliff. So you're going through college, you're starting to figure it out, you're starting to become more aware, awakened. Has there been any investigation into alternative therapies, or is this just strictly now we're listening to some Ram Dass, who is amazing, by the way? And I'm a gigantic Alan Watts fan. Like,
Okay. Yeah.
I always ask everyone, are you a noun or a verb? So, and they're like, I'm a noun. I'm like, actually, you're not. You're a verb. So always changing. So, but yeah. So up until this point, have we had any other experiences?
From this point, truthfully, I got into some like things that really weren't very healthy for me because it always creeps back in and you're trying to escape. And so, I got into big like electronic music scene and went to a whole lot of shows, which was another form of escapism. But throughout all of this, I was what I'd say waking up more and more. And I was having these downloads, I guess you could call it, that all of a sudden I'd have an epiphany and things would click. And so it was really this process was this form of introspection. It wasn't yet, working with psilocybin or anything like that. It was really just observing and witnessing myself to learn about me. And
Mm.
so that self introspection, being open to that, was like the start of me connecting to something bigger. Because after I went, left church and stopped going to that, I went atheist because I was like, this is not real. God can't be like this. And I rejected it. Then I went to agnostic, where I believed something was there, but I didn't know what. And that's kind of where it was. And so then I was open to this. And I think starting to open up to that allowed me to really connect to something bigger. And that was the first alternative medicine that I worked with, was allowing me to connect to a source that's higher than me. And I started having these downloads and realizations and epiphanies because I was really doing the work of witnessing who I was as a person and how my brain was, the different patterns that were coming up. And at first, I didn't know what I was doing at all. You read a couple books and it's like, oh, that makes sense. I think that the book Letting Go by David R. Hawkins, that's like one of the biggest books that started to open me up to being able to move through stuff in a different way. And it just all starts, the pieces start to come together and you start to see things differently. And so it wasn't until 4 or 5 years ago that I really started to get more into the plant medicine world, if that's how you want to describe it. And I had stopped therapy completely. So right after college, I stopped therapy because I saw that it wasn't doing anything. It wasn't serving me. It was making me just go in circles. And I was sitting there talking about my weekly problems and not really going forward anywhere.
That's the biggest thing that I hear, and I don't know if you hear the same thing from a lot of the people that I work with, is that going to see a psychiatrist or psychologist, not that I'm saying don't go, is that it just doesn't help. You used the term robot earlier, and I feel like there could be an AI app that's just as good as, like, from what I hear, most psychiatrists and psychologists tell me more about that, and just let you talk. It is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the therapy, to me, it's a process, right? We have to do things in small steps in order to get to a place that works. Otherwise, if you skip steps, then it doesn't work. And so for me, one of the steps was going to therapy. It was what I needed to do at the time to at least put in the effort to show myself that I was trying to help myself out.
And I think it gives you the courage and almost the permission to be able to say the hard things. I was talking to, as we started our conversation this morning, I was talking to my friend who was like, I have a lot of guys, and I see this a lot with guys and with men that they just will not open up and they will not share their stuff. And I remember my coach telling me, I have a mentor that I worked with who he said to me, who the most powerful person in the room is, it's the one with no secrets.
Hmm.
That guy who walks into a room with no secrets, most powerful guy.
Yeah,
And,
because there's
and I
no
think,
part of themselves that they're hiding.
yeah, and I feel like seeing someone gives you the acknowledgement within yourself to be able to start to share some of your secrets.
Yeah, yeah. The hard part with it is that, of course, with any therapist or anything like that, you can't share all of them because if I tell them I want to kill myself, there's a problem, And all of a sudden, there's all of these alerts and stuff that are now making me hide my authentic self once again because if I show it, then problems happen. And so that's kind of where I got to this place that I realized it was helping. I had one therapist in college that she was amazing. She made me feel seen, and that was the most important part. It was
Wow.
talking to another human instead of a doctor or something, and that was a big difference. And so, but afterwards, it was really that realization that I could only go so far with this. It wasn't going to do what I needed it to do. And so that's pretty much when I got out of bed, I made that decision. I had stopped antidepressants cold turkey because I was like, I'm not numbing myself anymore. It was making me a zombie. Wasn't being able to feel my emotions or anything. I'd rather feel misery than nothing at all.
Mm.
And so I got off that, stopped going to therapy, and said, the only way I'm getting through this is by taking it into my own hands and figuring this out myself. And I'll tell you, if I didn't do that, I wouldn't be where I am now.
So walk me through where you are now because I'm like super excited. You you find this road, and I'm always so humbled and amazed at how we find these roads because I always share mine. Like I built a successful company, I had things, and nothing could fill that void, like nothing. And then even having people tell me like if I would just let go and try this plant medicine, that all these other friends and entrepreneur business partners and people that I knew were having these incredible transformations. And I still said no. I was like, no, it's drugs. That's not Christian. There's no way I'm going to do that. Then the next thing I know, I'm healed and having a conversation every week with amazing people like you about this amazing transformational power that we all have the potential to have. Help me with that one. Like, how did you find, like, how did the road get where you are today?
Well, so after college, I went down this path of really trying to learn about myself. And then from there, I became an engineer. And so I was a manufacturing engineer for 8 years. I
Mm.
actually, this past year, I just ended that position. And But with that, it was the same type of thing. It wasn't filling the void. It was like me trying to pretend to be something I wasn't, even though I was really good at it, but it still wasn't me. Eventually, I had an apartment where I was kind of isolated for like a year, living by myself, and I came across psilocybin chocolates. And that was the first time I had done psilocybin once in high school and then LSD a couple times in college. And to me, it was always like too much because I was, in not a stable mindset. So it brought up a whole lot of stuff I didn't know how to navigate through.
But
And
so did you have a bad trip? Because I always hear this. So I always tell people, and maybe you disagree. I don't believe there's a bad trip. I believe there are difficult parts of an experience, but I feel like you go into the intention part of all of that, and I always find it fascinating. I was never around any of the like I don't even know anybody who did, and I remember cannabis was like a gigantic deal, like growing up, and it was insane. So you found chocolate,
yep.
and
And so essentially, I started with just like one square, a very low dose, and I didn't know what to expect, but I was experimenting and I was learning about myself. And so I did that, and what it did was it brought me to the closest expression of real love that I could possibly imagine. And I had been disassociating for years, 8 years or whatever because of depression. I didn't want to feel because everything I felt was overwhelming, and it was negative. And so this allowed me to feel love. And I was like, whoa, like what is going on right now? And so from there, I started to explore more with it. And, I did more than just one square and started to have more in depth experiences. The thing that really brought it full circle pretty quickly was because I did have a connection with something bigger than me, though I didn't know what it was. I was pretty in tune with my intuition. And so I would work with these chocolates and then trust my intuition. And I would go, one time I did it and I was like, oh, I got to go out back to the woods. And I did that. And I was just like, oh, I'm supposed to walk through these trees into the woods. It brought me up onto a knoll and I looked out and it was the sun setting directly across over the horizon through the trees. And I just had this epiphany moment where basically I had like a vision and I zoomed out all the way to the point where I was completely out of myself and I was watching myself as if you were like telescoping up all the way as far as you see videos probably where it goes really, really far to the point where the earth becomes a dot and everything. And I went so far that everything became just a dot. And I had this realization that everything is actually just that infinite point of potential, that same moment of the Big Bang. And it's all that right now. And I am just nothing. But I'm also everything at the same time because of that. And so then, and I don't know if it's because of my history with religion, I literally zoomed back all the way down and all I saw was just this vision of Jesus. And I mean, it was more of a feeling in me than anything, but what it did to me changed everything. And it was like, oh, there's something to this. And so I worked with it here and there. I tried to be good about it because I had a tendency of self-sabotaging and getting addicted to things I could escape with, drugs in high school,
Yeah.
all of these different things. And so this was like, I started working with it to explore rather than to escape, to really learn more about me and learn more about the connection to the universe. And that's where like the whole biggest transformation and the final chapter up to now kind of begins, I would say.
That is so beautiful. And I find it fascinating because very similar. So I know they're called ethnogens for a reason, and I know we've been using them for thousands of years, but I had very similar experience. Again, I walked away from God after I left Bible college, had zero interest. And I remember I was married for 22 years at this point. My wife's already telling me she loves me, but she's not in love with me anymore and she's not leaving. I need to figure it out. So I remember I had an out of body experience too. And I was actually looking down on myself. And God is standing over me with this light and there's all this darkness that had been hitting me my whole life. And my wife was actually covering my hands and my feet. And she was taking all of my darkness for 22 years of our marriage. She basically protected me from myself, which is why I didn't kill myself.
Wow.
But yeah, so when I wrote a book called Walking in the Garden, Discovering God Through Psychedelics. At the end of my first experience, he and I were walking in the garden with God, naked. We were free of our egos, and it was like the most beautiful thing. So yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. It's amazing what it can do. And it just things like that, visions like that just completely transform everything for you in the snap of a finger. It's incredible.
So now you're gone through. Tell me about the church. Like, how did all of this happen? So, and then I want to know, like, where are we now? Because like where you're headed now is like super exciting, and I think so badly needed. So how did the church happen? So we've gone from chocolates now to a thing. Like we're actually part of a thing that
Right.
we kind of walked away from.
Right. So this is a very interesting story. And for me, it's direct proof that spirit's real, everything's aligned, and it's all leading you somewhere. I was literally in a Kohl's and I was checking out at the register there, and there was this woman next to me, this young woman, and I walked out, and she walked out behind me, and I just went to my car. She was parked next to me, and she came up, knocked on my window, and said, "Hey, I work with sacred plant medicines and thought that maybe you'd be interested." And I was
Mm.
like, weird, but okay. And it was, right after I had started working with psilocybin, and the card was Sacred Earth Sanctuary, a psilocybin church. And I'm like, okay. And so we connected, and she's amazing, Christina. She founded the church, and she had just gotten it officially registered.
Mm.
And essentially we connected. We were like the same person, but she was the female version of me. And I started to help her. She had already been sitting with a lot of people, had started, she founded it. She actually registered with the state and everything like that. And so from there, we kind of dove in together, and, we built out the website. We did the statement of beliefs. We did all the different things. We really, brought what we truthfully practiced and believed in into a physical form to be able to represent it. And once the website kicked off, then all of a sudden people started to find it more and more. And it's been, 3 years. It's been so many different journeys within that 3 years because, when you're, especially in the United States, it's not necessarily completely accepted yet. Some places more and more it is starting to, but I mean, the biggest thing is like we really live this life. It is what we practice. The mushroom is our sacrament to connect to spirit and something bigger and to us.
Yeah.
And so, Christina went, she sat with the mayor of the town we were living in. She sat with the chief of police, and we were out there in the open, and they were shaking our hands saying they were proud of us and that they supported us. Yeah.
Wow, that's so crazy. I remember I spoke at the psychedelic conference in Denver last year, and I had it was a crazy story. I was giving my talk, and it was a woman who walked in, and she sat in the very front row, and for whatever reason she just like stood out to me. And she came up to me afterwards, and she said, my name is, I'm not going to go into that. She was actually an associate pastor of one of the largest mega churches in the country. Like, and she's like,
Interesting.
I have been feeling this draw to plant medicine. I Googled plant medicine and Christianity, and you were the first thing that popped up.
Wow.
And I just sat there for a second, kind of dumbfounded. And she's like, God told me to listen to you and that you were the real deal of some kind. And I was kind of like, this isn't even happening. So she came to find me at my booth, and she's like, I'm walking by all these mushroom tables and I feel like this story. And I don't know why I feel like that, but I need you to help me understand. So it's exactly what you're saying. People are searching for something in church today, even like the ones that we think still have stories. So to hear a police chief and a mayor shaking your hand and saying, well done. So kind of walk me like through that. So when I think of church services, I know what I think. Are they different? Are they same? We're using sacrament as the sacrament instead of like a wafer and a thing of juice, I presume.
Right, right.
But
Yeah, so we don't do Sunday services. We had to go through a whole lot of really deep reflection and realize that a church doesn't need to be exactly what it's always been. It just needs to be the place where you are kind of contemplating the bigger questions and trying to become better. And so our whole thing was, we would have ceremonies, group ceremonies, solo ceremonies. We started doing what we called micro days, which was a day where the community came together and we would microdose and then have like outdoor activities and stuff like that to just connect and be together in community.
be
And then,
grounded with nature.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So, and then we also did support groups. We still do free integration calls once a month that are on Zoom for anybody who wants to hop on, even if you're not a member of the church. And so it really is this combination of connecting with the psilocybin mushroom, our sacrament, but also connecting with ourselves and community. And so we kind of tried to rewrite what a church is in our own way. Because I'm not trying to be a Christian church. I'm trying to be whatever the heck we are and allowing that to be. And I'm not going to have somebody tell me what it is that we're supposed to be, because I don't want to fit in a box. I want to be authentic. And so we just continued to essentially mold the church into what felt right. And that means that we started things, realized that wasn't right, shifted that, and everything was completely transforming all the time, just like life is, right? Constantly is changing. And so, yeah, it wasn't like a normal we get together every Sunday, but it was we get together multiple times a month with various people to sit in ceremony and connect.
Wow, that sounds so like incredible. I'm thinking as you're talking about this, one of my favorite authors, his name is Rob Bell. He wrote a book called Velvet Elvis. And the book is basically the premise of the book is way back in like the 60s and 70s, there used to be these paintings of Elvis and they were all on these velvet canvases. And I guess like I never really saw one, but I guess they were like super cool. And I think I saw one like when I was like super young in somebody's basement. It was behind like a stairwell and they kind of in a storage area where it was cool at one point, but now no longer cool. Like we don't really see those anymore today. And he was portraying the image of the church as the same way. The church is still stuck in the old messaging and it's just not cool. Like they have not adapted. So I love that you at least you use the term that I always enjoy is we just be like we're just kind of doing our thing, and if it doesn't work we evolve because people don't like to evolve. They really like to stay stuck.
Well, and they want to stay rigid to the systems that have always been there. And, so a lot of people would question and be like, well, you're not a church. And it's like, well, we're not the church based off of the belief systems that you have created because they've pushed that into you. We're a church based off of what we are. And,
Mm.
we have a full board of directors and everything like that. I mean, we're real. We are registered with the state, the
Yeah.
IRS, the whole thing. So we are a church. We're just different. And by that, it allowed for us to really work with people in a way that breaks them out of the mold that's always been there.
I'm thinking because as I was writing my book, and I'm sure you probably hear it a lot too. Whenever you talk about plant medicine or psychedelics or entheogens or whatever, you always get these comments as backlash. Like it's like completely normal. And I remember I was doing a show and somebody threw the Peter verse to me about being of sober mind because I always hear this one, and I'm like sober mind, yet you're on SSRIs and you have anxiety. Like there's nothing sober about that mind. But have you gotten any like have you had those kind of people where you like you're this is drugs, this is not anything that is of gotten some of that? I would imagine it would.
Some, not as much as you would think, to be honest. And the reason why I say that is because most people that are coming to us have been on, or maybe not most, but a lot of people have been on SSRIs and things like that. And those are drugs and they know it and they know they don't work. And so people are looking for something that actually will connect them to be able to get on that path that is healing. And so, it's just a modality. That's another thing that I say. It's just another healing modality in a different way that actually connects you in rather than separates you from, where
Yeah,
SSRIs do that.
yeah, and I was kind of equated to, and I hate using because in the U.S. and the West we love hack. Like it will get you there way faster
Yeah.
to
It's
a
a cheat.
connection. But again, I remember when I was writing my book, I'm so fortunate that I have a really good church and my pastors. Like I went to lunch and I was telling you about the book I wanted to write and about my experiences, and the only thing that they actually said to me was, "Wow, that's really controversial. I love it. Can you tell me more about it?"
Wow.
And it was so supportive for me to be able to hear that and to be able to just love you where you're at and to know that we're all connected and we all have our roles. So speaking of roles, like tell me what you're doing now. Like cuz I love this.
Yeah, so after, about 3 years of doing many, many ceremonies, I mean, we have probably 450 members officially of the church. I've facilitated for over 200 people myself, whether it's solo ceremonies or group ceremonies. And eventually I got to this place where, well, burnout came because we did too much. The demand became too big. We were featured in Boston Magazine in one of their like exclusive articles. Actually, the one of the people that works for them sat with us to experience it and stuff. And from there, because we were in that article, everything blew up.
Mm.
And we got a little burnt out because we were pushing and pushing and weren't, you learn how to take care of yourself over time. Let's just say that. And
Yeah,
I
I know
got,
you and I were joking about that because I went to a ceremony in November, and I was like, "Please just allow me to just watch over me," because you do. Like, it's incredibly what's the word I'm looking for? It's incredibly beautiful to be able to see how you're helping people, but it's very exhausting as well.
oh yeah, absolutely. Because, well, essentially, we kind of came to a place where we started to feel like we were martyrs, where we were self
Mhm.
sacrificing in order to do the greater good, the due diligence it needed, because everyone is suffering right now, especially with the world the way that it is. But we also saw that we can't hold space properly or take care of people in the ways that need to be if we're not taking care of ourselves. And we're so deeply connected with spirit that we allow for life to unfold without being attached, even though it's hard still, because you got to let go of things when it's no longer aligned and everything like that. But the reality comes down to we came to a place after this year where we're kind of just like ready to take the next steps in life. And it's really just been me and Christina, and we've had some really awesome volunteers here and there help us. But to be sitting with countless people throughout the year, we came to a place where we're like ready to step into life in a different way. And
Mm.
so I saw this opportunity to really step into helping people and supporting them in a different way, because let's face it, you sit in ceremony, you kind of take a pause from life to do that, and then you go back into life and you integrate and hope that you do a good job. And most people don't really show up for themselves or go out of their way to get coaching or whatever to be able to integrate properly. So,
So I didn't mean to cut you off. So
yeah,
talk to me about that. Like, so, because you and I had this conversation, this is why I'm so passionate about this. When you say integrate, though, like what does that really mean? To people who maybe are listening who don't really know what any of this is, and I know when I was searching, if you would have told me preparation, setting, integration, like I had no idea what that stuff was. Like I just know that I'm hurting and I just want to heal. But walk me through what is integration and what does that really look like?
yeah, well, to me, integration is probably more important than the ceremony itself. If you don't integrate, then you are not really taking anything out of the experience and integrating it into your life. And so that's what integration is. It's taking the insights, the different things that you experience throughout your ceremony, and then incorporating them into your life so that way you bring about transformation. Because if you go sit in ceremony and you don't do anything or change anything about yourself, all you're doing is having an experience that's probably profound, but then you're still you after, and you just go right back to how you've always been. A lot of people have like what I call the medicine glow for a month or something like that. They're like, "Oh, I feel amazing. My depression's completely gone. This is a miracle." A month later, they're like, "I'm miserable again." And it's because they brought no change. They hoped that the medicine, the mushroom was going to do it for them. And they didn't do any integration, which is the work that we do on ourselves. It's seeing where you're caught up, seeing where you're self sabotaging, and bringing about change so that you show up in a different way so that you're supporting yourself. Because if you're not supporting yourself and trying to show up as your best self, then you're always kind of unconsciously self sacrificing and self sabotaging too.
So it's almost like chasing a high,
Yes.
a spiritual high. Because I see it a lot too sometimes with people who go to like church for the first time, or they accept Jesus into their heart, and now they got this incredible glow, and then like a month later it's like, talk to me now. Like it's like you eventually have to come off the mountain and come into the real world, and I feel like most of the time people are just chasing the high and they don't really want to do, because I feel like we don't do a great job as a industry, as if that's a term that we can use now, or in an ideology is probably a better word, where we're really preparing you for integration. We're preparing you for all the incredible cool things that you're going to see in the trip, but we never really talk about the journey.
Exactly. And that's huge. And we're involved in a pretty big plant medicine community in this general area. And you see it a lot where it's the same people going to ceremony after ceremony after ceremony. And it's because they're constantly chasing that high, like you said. And it really becomes this interesting game that the mind plays because it makes you believe that you're doing this for healing. And I'm not saying no healing happens. It does. These experiences are profound. But when you feel like, oh, it's time for another ceremony, you need to look at that because you're essentially coming off of your high and you're starting to crash. And it's like, well, I got to go bring myself back up. It's like that right there is where the work is supposed to start taking place, like, especially because if you're starting to come down, you need to see, why am I coming down? What do I keep doing that is preventing me from feeling good? Because most of the time it's self-inflicting. It is not anything outside of us. It's the way that we are programmed. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of people do really go from ceremony to ceremony to ceremony in order to try to stay up here. Then
Yeah.
they identify with the spiritual ego or something like that and think that they're really someone because they've done 150 ayahuasca ceremonies or something.
I'm enlightened.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting and it's a fine line. This is why, for me, I say integration is more important than ceremony because if you don't integrate, you're just continuously stuck right where you are, but just in a different way of escaping.
Do you see some of the issues? Because I'm just thinking about my own experiences. When I went to my first experience, it was thousands of dollars for the experience, and exactly like you're saying. So I know a lot of people who have gone back to the same place 4, 5, 6, 7 times, enough for a small house, and it's like, what are you looking for? You have to keep going back, and I know I went once, and I'm like, I think there's more in the what I'm not doing and integrating than what it is that calling me to come back to the same medicine. So are you kind of seeing the same thing? But I think the bigger problem is most integrations, when you have these incredible experiences, I don't care how much you spend, it could be $100 or $10,000. You get a couple of phone calls or a couple of face to face. I love that you guys do free integration every month, whether you're a member or not. But do you feel like maybe that's some of the issues? Is that
Yeah,
the integration kind of falls short?
yeah, absolutely. A lot of places, or at least some people that I know, they're starting to incorporate like a package deal. So you get a couple preparation calls, then the ceremony, and then a couple integration calls afterwards. So it kind of forces you upon it. You can't sit unless you do that type of deal. And so that's where things are starting to shift because I think people are starting to see, wait, this isn't working. But you're right. You do see people that they're falling short because they're just chasing the experience and not the work. And and that's not to say that you get so caught up in the work that you become a person who's healing for the rest of your life. It's to say that you are devoted to doing your best to show up the best you can without trying to run from what you feel. And going to ceremony and after ceremony, especially if you spend a ton of money, you associate the value of it to the money you pay, which then increases the high you get because you really feel like, wow, this is incredible.
Yeah.
And so then you get subconsciously kind of addicted to that even more. And the
Yeah.
money is an interesting thing when it comes to this work because we live in a world where you have to make money to exist. You will literally not survive if you don't make money. But we're also doing work where it's not supposed to be about that. And so that's been a really big conversation in our church. We charge a range depending on what you're looking for, but it's not a ton of money, but it's not sustainable for us either. And that's the thing. That's why I think these bigger places are charging so much money because in order to do this full time, you need to charge it so you can live because it's not sustainable to do 30 ceremonies a month to bring in enough money to be able to pay for the church and the whole thing, the operation, and then also be able to survive as individuals that are helping out.
Yeah, I remember I was having a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a facilitator, and they were kind of walking through their pricing structure. And it's always money is always an odd conversation anyway, whether it's with family or with anybody. In the U.S., we just like we feel weird talking about money. And he was like walking me through his offer, and he was telling me what he was charging, and it really was higher than what anybody else was. And he's like, "What do you think?" And I look back, I'm like, "Wait a minute, you're giving lifetime integration." like lifetime. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm like, that alone is worth what you're charging. Because
Or
again,
die.
kind of going back to, yeah, or you're going a couple of times. But I'm like, how can that be sustainable?
It's
And
not.
he's like, well, most people won't do it. We want them to, but they won't. They'll get to a point because I personally, like, I work with you because back in my old wellness days, there's something called the Prochaska stages of change where people are in stages of change. 6 months is usually when it becomes a habit. When you finally have the tools to be able to kind of go off and learn to be able to do it on your own. So I typically, like, when I work with somebody, it's 4 to 6 months is what, and then I will kind of like set you free. You always have access, but set you free. And I know that was one of the things we were talking about here with Numa is how do I support facilitators? Because I'm trying to move out of the space. God keeps moving back in. I'm trying to move out. How do I support facilitators and how do I help with integration guides? And how do I just what I thought was odd and God gave me the idea of just giving you a morning journal prompt. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to journal about today. I sent you a text message for free every day for the rest of your life. Just gave you a journal prompt to get the conversation going. Thought that would be kind of cool. But yeah, I feel like that there is that conversation is kind of happening everywhere with charge, the value, and how do we do all of it and make it sustainable, like you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because I don't know that there's a right or wrong, like we said, you know? And so it's really just what are your belief systems around it? Some people think it's extremely worth the money, other people think it's insane. And so it's there's always going to be people like that too. And so it's really just about doing what is morally right based off your intuition. If the mind gets involved, you're never going to come to a conclusion that feels right. You're always going to have to tune into that body and see what feels right to you. And then if other people judge, that's based off them, not you. As long as you're not trying to screw them over, then you're always doing the right thing. But you bring up a good point with it about, trying to continuously support it while getting out of the space, because that leads me into, we're closing the church. Last night we literally decided that it's official, we are closing the church. Yeah. And so this is a big thing. And it's even saying this right now is very difficult, because it feels deep down like we're letting down so many people. And it makes us feel like we're almost judged in a sense because, oh, well, this is such good work. You're helping so many people. But we have sacrificed ourselves to such an extent. I have put my entire life on pause for 3 years. And resentment comes in and all this stuff. I mean, I used to go hiking 5 times a week. I haven't gone hiking more than 3 times in 3 years because when I'm off, I'm burnt out. And when I'm on, I am fully devoted. And so we've just come to the place, like I said earlier, that we're starting to realize we need to really come into the rest of our lives and build a foundation before we can step back into it. Or do it a little bit here and there, but not completely wide open to the public because there's so many people and not a lot of places out there that do this.
Right.
And so I have stepped into opening my own business outside of this now, which is Inner Evolutions. And this is something that I'm like really proud of and excited to see expand because I've essentially come to the place where, well, I've always looked at my depression in a way that was like, I need to figure this out so I can report back to the people and teach them. Because everything that's out there isn't working, or you got to pay a ton of money in order to get the secrets that are being gatekept. And so my whole thing is like, I've gone in, I've beaten my depression, I've like mastered so many things that most people don't even think about or realize exist. And now I'm here reporting back and teaching people how to do that. And so, I work with people microdosing because I believe microdosing speeds up the process. But microdosing is also interesting because it's the combination of the work and integration at once. So it's not you sit in ceremony and then go integrate after. It's I'm working with the mushroom and integrating at the same time.
I've had so many guests. We've had this conversation, and I love this conversation. Do you need to have a big dose in order to make changes? No.
I don't think so. I think that there's things that come from a big dose. Connection to something bigger than you is one. And the biggest thing that has transformed me is my deep belief in spirit, and that's something that larger doses helped me with to understand the oneness of everything. but you don't need it. You don't.
Yeah, so I always, you're right. I feel like it depends on what you got going on in there. Cause I know like for me, MDMA was my first. I had severe complex PTSD from being abused, sexually abused as a child. And I feel like I needed that foundation first. So just what you're saying, being able to go in and revisit without having to relive. And then actually being able to call my abuser 6 weeks after I hadn't found him. I hadn't seen her talk to him in 48 years, and I found him, and I was able to get closure just because of that. And you're right. I question that today. Like, would I be in the same place today if I didn't have that hero dose, or if I just continued down the microdose?
Yeah, and I don't think that I would personally, as much as I want to say I would, because I know that you can absolutely move through the things you need to and get to the other side without needing that hero dose or whatever you want to call it. I think also it was important because I do connect with spirit in a way I never would have been able to even imagine, because you can't imagine that. Your mind can't possibly wrap itself around the idea of what actually seems to be. Not that I know anything, but what my experiences have shown me is that there is a oneness, a higher consciousness that is everything, including us.
I never really get into the specifics. I don't know why I feel led to share this. I did an 8 gram dose in November, and it was exactly like what you're saying. Though, as a facilitator, you give. We're great caregivers, horrible caretakers. You typically see this a lot in this field. I just said, please hold space for me. And I kept saying, God, will you please slow down? And he's like, nope, you're capable of handling all of this. And it was so incredibly beautiful to be able to just do, like you're saying, that check in. But I had an experience very similar where I was immediately off into space, and I was just a dot.
Hmm.
And then everything was just a dot. And then I saw all my ancestors, generations of ancestors. And I lost my grandfather when I was very young. I was 15, and he and my dad showed up, and he said, will you do what none of us have been willing to do?
Hmm.
And I said, what's that? And he said, live. Will you live? And it was so incredibly beautiful because I was trying to figure out like where does NEMA fit into all of this. I had created this company to, like I said, help facilitate, to create hydration solutions to support. And I'm looking around and I see everyone doing the work, 18 people in ceremony. And that's when it hit me that all of this is the celebration of the human experience. It's good, it's bad, it's right, wrong, whatever we want to call those labels, and trauma and happiness, sadness, joy and pain. And they're all the same. And what is the name of your blog? Is the human experience,
Yeah,
which is why I was like, okay, this all makes sense.
yeah, yeah, and you're right. It is everything is a celebration of existence and being a human. And to experience existence, we are humans. And so it is really that celebration, and it's so beautiful because we get to really tune into the miracle of existing at all. And before, I used to not want to exist. And what you said about, being able to live, that is what I've come to learn is like the whole goal is learning to be brave enough to live and experience life as a human.
All good and bad.
Yeah,
Because like we
because
said
it's both.
before, there really is no such thing. There only is.
Yeah, I mean, the human existence is dual. It is the good, the bad, the hot, the cold, this or that. And when you get out of that and step into a world where paradox exists, all of a sudden everything makes so much more sense, but your mind can't wrap itself around that either. And so you realize that it's good and bad at the same time. There's suffering and happiness taking place at the same time. It's not one or the other. We suffer because we want it to be one or the other. But when you realize they're both there always, it's incredible. Ram Dass says a thing. I love Ram Dass. And he says a thing about it's like there is a baby being born right now. What beautiful thing. At the same exact time, there is someone taking their last breath. What excruciating suffering. So it's the same exact things are happening right now. And so everything is existing at the same time, which means that paradox is the real truth. We just perceive things in the dual nature in order to experience.
Yeah, wow, you're exactly right. So inner evolutions, we're now, what are we doing? We're individual integration.
So it's kind of a combination. I work with a lot of people microdosing and teaching them practices to go along with that. A lot of people are wanting to microdose because antidepressants and stuff aren't working, and they want to take back control of their lives and step out of depression or anxiety. And so I work with a lot of people with that, teach them different tips and tricks and different practices to really be able to move through in a quicker pace. But I also am open to a lot of things. I have a lot of experience, of course, with the plant medicine world and psilocybin specifically. And so I do work with people through that, whether it's preparation, integration, and stuff. At the same time, I also have been feeling this call from spirit because I realize you don't need any of these plant medicines to get the work done. As much as a lot of facilitators and stuff want to say, oh, yeah, you have to do this to really get healing, it's just not true. What the plant medicine has allowed me to do is see the patterns of suffering and reverse engineer it. And now I am bringing what I've learned to teach people things. And it's the type of thing. I have someone right now, I'm working on a 4-week package with them. Within 3 weeks, they already have changed their life when they've been suffering with depression for quite a long time. There's someone in Wales that I'm working with, and she, for I don't even know how long, has been like stuck in bed, can't do anything, having a hard time. And now she's like she's about to, we're not working together anymore because she's ready to go back into life. And it's like, so it just shows that if we actually understand ourselves, you can actually change way faster than most of us believe. But none of us are taught how to do that. We're not taught how to be humans. And so my biggest goal is to teach people essentially how to live life as a human being, not as a worker, not as someone that needs to go make money, but to learn how to navigate your emotions and regulate your nervous system, step out of survival mode. And so as much as I've done plant medicine work, I am moving in a direction where that's part of it, but not the whole thing. And so there's so many people that don't want to work with psilocybin and they just want to heal. And so those are my main, human that I interact with, because those are the people that are trying to just learn how to live. And my goal was always to be able to master being a human without needing anything.
Because we are divine. I mean, that was like one of the things I saw in a meditation. I back into outer space and I saw this gigantic monolith. It's actually on my computer screen, and I all it said was "You are divine." I was like,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's the truth. We are, we are the cells of the greater big picture, the greater being, which is spirit.
So you mentioned you work with somebody in Wales. You're everywhere, so we can find you. We can work together telephonically. We can work together through probably Zoom, because I know
Yep.
everyone's doing Zoom and things today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. So I do it online mostly. People around here, sometimes I get together person to person. We go for walks and do our whole thing. But it's usually, Zoom. I do a microdosing group. I'm about to build out a kind of like a overcoming depression and anxiety group as well. I have a course that is like a 6-week course that leads you through all of microdosing and the different practices and stuff that you can do by yourself, or it also is directly correlated with that group that I do, which I call Rise. It's all about rising into your empowerment. And so it's a really beautiful thing. We just wrapped up our last group a couple of days ago, and really great transformations within that. Stuff that people are like, I've never done any of these things before, and they've sat with plant medicines quite a lot. So
wow,
it's because it's not about anything other than learning yourself. And
yeah.
so
I am a gigantic fan. I don't know if you ever heard of the author Byron Katie.
I have.
So huge fan of the work, because everything that you're describing are those tools of being able to actually understand past stories that are dictating future narratives that haven't even happened yet. that are robbing you of the future. So I honor and applaud the incredible work that you're doing. So,
Thank you.
so Rory, if it's okay with you, I'm going to direct people to your website. So, is there anywhere else I should put them? I'll actually, you know what, listeners, I will put all of Rory's information in the show notes on where to find him on Facebook, Instagram, your blog, which is incredible, by the way. I love the human experience. But for any of those people who are wanting to hear more or want to reach out to Rory, his information will be out on the show notes on Wednesday. And look forward to having more conversation.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been phenomenal.
It was so divinely timed. We were kind of joking about it at the very beginning. I don't know that either one of us, I think the conversation would have been beautiful anyway, but I feel like what has transpired over the last couple of days has really kind of navigated the thoughts, or at least the intuition and the feelings that we're having today. So again, I honor the work that you're doing, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode with Rory Stephens, Inner Evolutions Coaching. The information will be out on the show notes on Wednesday. Again, thank you very much for your support, for listening. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, on Facebook. You can also listen to this on any podcast episode, a player that is out there, Spotify, Apple. We are on all of them. We're on YouTube as well. Please forward this to somebody who you think needs it. There is so much going on in the world today. So much anxiety, there's so much depression, and these conversations are very, very badly needed. And having beautiful souls and people like Rory who are here to man the front lines, if you will, to be able to have these conversations for healing. This is Alan Wiederhold, your host of Pneuma, the crossroad of science and enlightenment.